Welcome to the urgency of slowing down. I'm your host, Laura L. Smith. Join me as I chat with the most amazing guests about ways we can fight hustle culture to slow down and step into the beautiful and abundant unforced rhythms of grace Jesus invites us into. Today, we're going to talk about slowing down to savor the small stuff with Jennifer Dukes Lee. Jennifer is the best-selling author of several books, including Growing Slow and Stuff I'd Only Tell God. She's a fan of queso, bright lipstick, me too, and singing too loudly to songs with great harmony. She lives on a fifth-generation family farm in Iowa, where she and her husband have made a life of growing crops, pigs, two beautiful humans, and an enduring faith. Jennifer, I'm so honored to have you on today. Thank you for joining me.
This is so fun. We are like-minded in one of our main messages, this idea of slowing down. So this should be fun.
Yeah, it should be fun. And it is so important. You are an author and an editor and a mama and helping your husband with the farm. You could be in a huge hurry. You've got a lot of plates that you're spinning. So yet you have chosen to grow slow and written a whole book called Growing Slow. Before we dive into how you got to this shift and how you started fighting hustle culture, can you talk a little bit about why you think our culture is in such a hurry? Like, what's the driving force behind this hurry and hustle we live in?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with achievement, this idea that we need to hit certain milestones at certain points in our lives. And I think especially, like I know even when I was a teenager, there was this expectation that you get good grades and then you get to college and then you get good grades there and you get married and have kids, and this constant climbing and scaling is just this expectation.
Next and the next and the next and the next.
Yeah. And then just like even inside of any of those things, like lose 10 pounds by this weekend or,
right.
Get rich in a month. Like that.
5 quick, easy ways to fill in the
Yeah,
blank.
exactly. I mean, everything is how to get what you want and how to get it quickly. And you could just look to the ads for proof. And we buy into that. And I think even more than, 30 years ago, now we have the added pressure, of course, of social media.
Right.
With a lot of people selling us a quicker strategy. And it's so interesting that I wrote Growing Slow because, I could sell a lot more books if I were to promote an idea of growing fast.
Right, for sure. Right.
Like,
that's what everyone wants, right?
You can get what you want by the end of 2024 or whatever time frame it is. Like that's what fills arenas. That's what gets you a large following on Instagram. But what you and I are doing is very countercultural to, at least in Western culture, this idea of slowing down and savoring and sometimes deciding that you're going to let some things pass you by and some people pass you by.
Yeah.
I've seen authors that are new on the scene that have far more followers and potentially far more sales in their books than I do. And I've been at this for a really long time. But so buying into that idea of a slower way of growing is countercultural, but you don't give up results actually when you do grow slow. And we can talk about that later, but you actually end up having more sustainable growth. We talk about that on the farm a lot, like putting down good roots into things and having sustainable growth instead of chasing something that is viral. And that's what culture says to do. Go viral, go big, or go home.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we can't, like, I love Instagram, but also I can't go on it with somebody telling me like you said, like how to have fewer wrinkles in a week, or also how to get 10,000 followers today or whatever. But the truth is all of those are and they're like junk food fixes. If I think of like what junk food is versus like a real home cooked meal with fresh ingredients, right? Just like what you're getting doesn't actually fill you or sustain you or nourish you, most importantly, when we're just sprinting around and rushing and not savoring what God has for us, because he has so much goodness for us in the here and now. Okay, so you, in your book, Growing Slow, talk about like being in this very hustle season and then actually having physical symptoms that you had to go see a doctor. Can you tell us a little bit about like what you were feeling and how that doctor's appointment went and what all came out of that?
Mm-hmm. So I had all kinds of symptoms that I couldn't put a reason on. Gut issues, um, headaches. I would actually get fevers, but
Mm.
wasn't really sick.
Yeah.
And I went to my regular practitioner to ask about what's going on and all kinds of tests. And there really wasn't anything going on. It's just like, well, I don't really know. You have headaches. That's too bad. Change up your diet. Don't know what the deal is with your fevers, but just try a few things. And I did, and nothing really changed. And so I went to a functional medicine doctor, which is kind of a holistic doctor.
Sure.
And he just sort of took a whole inventory of all of these weird symptoms. And he said, I think what you have is something called hurry sickness, which isn't like a real, like WebMD
Right, right,
diagnosis.
right.
It was just a way of describing this stress. So I was literally getting fevers caused by stress,
Well,
headaches caused by stress, gut issues caused by stress, and, not being able to sleep at night. And my cortisol levels were all off, and
yeah.
everything was just stress. And it was hurry induced stress. So thus hurry sickness.
Yeah.
And I first I pushed back because I'm like, I, I don't feel stressed. I mean, this is just the way I am. I'm like a growing fast girl. Like, that's just what I do. That's what I've always done. I'm not a grow slow girl,
You're
and
a
I can
go-getter.
handle it. And he just said to me, your body could withstand that in its 20s, but now that you are in your 40s, that just isn't going to work for you anymore. You're going to have to make some hard decisions. And I did. And I began to just look at my daily routines um, in a different way. I began to look at how I was interacting with people in a different way. I was, I made a lot of shifts in how I stopped working way into the evening and did routines at night to kind of eliminate stress and just slow down. And before long, these new ways of being really changed things for me physically, first of all, but I also saw them changing how I interacted with my family and friends. I'd look people in the eye.
Mm.
I wasn't, checking my phone everywhere, like in a Target line or a Starbucks line or at a
Right,
stoplight or something. All those things create hurry sickness because, like, oh, I got to respond to this.
right.
And I just created new boundaries in my life. And what I learned over those months and really years then became this idea of this growing slow book and what God taught me through this growing slow way.
Okay, there was so much in that. First of all, I think that our bodies actually speak to us. Like, I think as Christians, we're so focused on our souls, which is
Mhm.
awesome. Um, but God created our body, minds, and souls, our whole selves, and He cares about our bodies too.
I love
And I
that.
think
Yes.
it's so interesting that, your body was saying, slow down, you move too fast. Um, but and it took your body to say that for your soul and your mind to actually believe it and catch up with it. So I think for anyone who's listening, like, pay attention to your body and take care of your body because it matters, and our spiritual life matters, obviously, and the work God calls us to matters, but our bodies matter too. We can't do the things God calls us to, and we can't love and worship Him well when our bodies are not getting what they need. So I love that your body was telling you stuff, that God actually makes our bodies like work like that to send off alarms when things aren't right. You started to say you incorporated a lot of things, and one of them you said was checking your phone less, which I want to
Mhm.
talk about in a second. But I want to hear about the other things. You said some rituals in the evening and just some ways you were doing things. What are some of the things you actually did?
Yeah, a lot of things. So there's hardly any area of my life that was untouched by this idea to grow slow instead of grow fast. Um, One of the first things I did was when I woke up in the morning, instead of checking my phone immediately, which puts you into a kind of fight or flight mode and just makes things all wonky in your body, I just sat with myself and sat with the Lord and really just set the tone for the day. And it was simple. I mean, it was like just laying in bed and just taking a deep breath and like, God, what plans do you have for my life today?
So
And
good.
thank you, God, for, waking me up to this new day. And
Yeah.
sometimes it was like standing at the window. We have a beautiful yard because we're out on this farm, and I just race by these windows all the time. And
Hmm.
I would sit out on the step or look out a window and think, "Oh, God, you made everything so beautiful. And if I don't thank you for the beauty in my backyard, who else will?"
Yeah.
So these things were drawing me closer to God. They were drawing me closer to my environment. I mentioned a moment ago looking people in the eye when
Hmm.
we were talking. So often we've got our phones up like this, and we're kind of like looking at the phone, and
Yeah.
especially with our family because we just kind of take them for granted. But
All right.
really being deliberate about that created in me an unhurried heart because I
Yeah.
wasn't split. I was focused on the people that I loved the most.
Right.
Another thing that I did was I began to stop um, eating at my desk or eating while standing up. I was
Uh,
always in a hurry eating. And
oh yeah.
so I'm like, God gave us flavors and textures
Right.
in food, and I'm not pausing to enjoy it. So I began to, I mean, it's just like egg, I had my eggs and my sausage and my toast or whatever. And I just would sit down and enjoy that and enjoy
Yeah.
my hot cup of coffee.
Right.
Little things that weren't huge, but they made a huge difference. Daily walks, like even just 15 minutes a day, being outside under a big sky, just
Hmm.
made everything just kind of slow down and
Amen.
look and enjoy the world. And I never came back from one of those walks thinking, wow, I really regret having done that
Right. I
today.
wish I would have
Now
sent 3 emails instead of going on that
right.
walk. Said
Like I'm
no one
so
ever.
behind.
Right. Yeah.
And then as an Enneagram 3 who likes to get a lot of things done, probably the most important thing that I did is say goodbye to the office every day at 5 o'clock. I
Hmm.
literally said goodbye to the office,
Hmm.
turn the
It's
lights
good.
out, shut the door. My
Hmm.
workplace is in my home, and I
Hmm.
had to create a boundary. And
Right.
that's what it was. And I still do that. Good night to the office.
I
And my
love that.
husband kind of laughs, but he's just used to it. And I get that not everybody can turn it off at 5. Our work hours are all very different, but I think everybody needs to decide what is that boundary
Correct.
and stick to it as
Yeah.
best you can.
Yeah. No, it reminds me of that children's book, Goodnight Moon.
Yes.
And they're saying goodnight to everything in the room and the bowl of mush and the comb and the brush. But like even goodnight office, it just like we read that to our kiddos because it was such a signaling to the end of a day to help them get to sleep. But we need to signal the end of some things to get to more resting points too. You talked a lot of those rhythms seem to be things with our phones, and you're right. Like as soon as we pick it up, we are reacting to whatever's on our phone, which might not really have anything to do with what God has for us that day. It could be a text from someone we care about and like wanting to respond to them at some point, sure, but it could also be a news something or other, an email that has nothing to do with what God has in store for us that day. And we're in these rhythms of just picking up our phone constantly. You said not picking up your phone like at a red light or in line. Also, it takes training though. We have to be super intentional to do that because I find where I am trying to resist most is if I'm somewhere and everyone else picks up their phone. Like if you're in line somewhere and everyone else is on their phone, or even if you're in a room somewhere or a waiting room and like everyone's on their phone, or even with my own family, sometimes in the family room in the evening, everyone picks up their phone. I'm like, I'm going to be the one who doesn't. Like, it's just this like resisting saying no to what if I sat here and didn't pick up my phone and instead asked one of my family members a question about their day? Like, what if I engaged the people around me? What if in line, instead of picking up my phone to see, oh, did I get a response from so and so? What instead if I like turned that over and asked God like what he wanted to happen with that situation or prayed for the people in line? Like it just changes something. Um, Phones are certainly great, and I'm so grateful for mine as a way to communicate to my daughter who we just took off to college. Or,
Mm-hmm.
there's so many great things about our phones, but we have to, we are not supposed to be conformed by the patterns of this world, and we aren't supposed to let culture dictate who we are, what we do. Like we get to let Jesus do that, but we have to fight as Christians when everyone around us has their phones up, like you said. It has to be a super intentional act to say, no, this morning my alarm might go off, but then, like you said, I'm just going to breathe in for a second. Thank God for this day. See what he has for me. Like, so good. So good. I also like what you said about eating, because I love that in Mark 6, I believe it is, where Jesus calls the disciples away. He says, we haven't even had time to eat. Like, come away with me. Like, you guys have been going so fast, you haven't even been eating. Like, Jesus cares about that. He wants us to slow down and eat and be with him and take time with them. Like, I love that he sent the disciples out to do good work there. And then when they're coming back, he's like, yes, there's a time to do good work. And also there's a time to get away with me and rest and pause and eat. And like, he wants that for us.
Yeah,
The rhythms.
that's so good. A couple things came to mind when you said that. Number one is that God could have decided to fuel our bodies by you take this one pill every morning and that's enough.
For sure.
Or go up to a gas pump, stick it in your side, and when you get empty, then you go back to the quote gas pump of humanity.
Sure.
But instead, he's like, I'm going to give you really cool stuff to eat and practices and ways of being together in community. And you're absolutely right. Jesus, so many stories that unfolded in the Gospels unfolded around tables.
Yes.
He was making time to eat with people. Even after he had risen, he's like, I'm going to go find those guys, and I think I'm going to make them breakfast on the beach and pull them off of their boat for a minute, and we're just going to sit by this fire and have breakfast. I mean, that's so beautiful.
Well, and even then, Jesus could have gone snap fingers, fish roasted, but he doesn't. Like, he
Right.
takes the time to roast the fish over a fire and make the fire. And it said he serves them bread too. Like, we don't know if he made the bread or if he intentionally went somewhere and bought the bread, but he was intentional about meals. And if we want to follow Jesus, we should follow suit. Yeah, I love that so much. So what was the hardest thing when you were making these changes? What was your like biggest struggle? Or, it's one thing to say, oh, I just stopped looking at my phone and I just said goodnight to my office every night and la-di-da, just started, eating my meals. And what was the hardest thing to do?
The hardest thing was at the beginning being afraid that I was going to lose my edge or lose my place or lose my momentum, that I wasn't going to be successful. And that may sound like ambition's a bad thing as a Christian, but I think God calls us to do things and to do them well. And I was worried that if I started to set up new boundaries, that I wouldn't be all that God made me to be in the world, both, with my church or, with people who need me, all of the things and the demands that are on me as a mom and a wife, and like stuff still has to get done. You can't just
Right.
like go, hang out on a floaty in the middle of a lake and call it a life. Like we still have stuff to do. And I was
For
afraid I
sure.
was going to fail. Like if I did all these things to slow down, then I wasn't going to get as much done in that same window of time. So I believed that for quite a while. But what I discovered is that I was actually, quote, more successful. I was actually more productive in the sense that I had, kind of what they call deep work. I was focused, I was doing
Right.
the thing. And then when it was time, I took a break. So I wasn't even exhausted the next day. I was ready to get back at my work. I was ready to be the kind of person that I needed to be to my family. I was ready to be the kind of person that my church needed or a committee needed. There were certain things that I let go. There were certain yeses that I no longer gave. I learned that my no's are as important as my yes.
Amen.
But it helped me to prioritize. It helped me to see that I don't have to run, 50 miles an hour in order to get things done and do the work that God has called me to do in this world. And that was a huge relief to me because I think that God does call us to do things.
He
And
does.
they're hard things and they're busy things. And sometimes they are stressful things. But he will never, want us to he will never push us to the brink of exhaustion. That's just not the way, that's not what he's calling us to. And he's never wants us to get so busy that we can't even hear his voice anymore. That's anti-gospel. It's not who he is. So I was really surprised, pleasantly surprised that I could still, do good work in the world, even if I was slowing down and choosing intentionally to grow slow.
Yeah, no, that's so good because Jesus does say that if we come to him, he will give us rest. And he is our good shepherd who restores our souls. So if we find ourselves like spinning around thinking we have to do that like a hurricane for him, then we are buying into a lie
Hmm.
and we have to call it out as one. Like you said, there's tons of good work to do, and that could be a job, but it could also be in our families or being a
Hmm.
caretaker for someone or in our communities or in our churches or volunteer work, like neighborhoods. There's all kinds of good work we can be doing. But Jesus calls us to these rhythms, and he did it all the time. He would go heal a huge crowd and then go off to the mountain by
Hmm.
himself to pray and be with God and like take a breather and take a breath and slow down and savor. And gosh, he did it over and over again in scripture. And it's so beautiful that he modeled that for us so we could see, like, yeah, he healed thousands of people. He fed thousands of people. He did huge miracles. He preached. He did work. He had to deal with, you know, managing the disciples and their personalities. Like, he understands what it's like to manage the personalities in your home or your family, right? Like, he had to do all of that too. And he had to deal with the government. He had to deal with people like saying nasty things about him. He had to deal with all of that, and still he took time to get away and take breaks and pause. And like you were saying about the deep work too, when we are distracted, we don't do the deep work,
Hmm.
right? Like we never get into it. We're not as productive, and yet we think, oh, if I have my phone by my laptop, then I can answer texts and work on this project, and then I have my door open to my office. I can help anybody out there, and but you're actually only doing all of it like halfway and none of it full on,
That's so
which
good.
doesn't really end up working out very well for any of us. Um, so you did talk about you were able to be more productive and get more done, but that your biggest concern was this like falling behind, which I think is a, lie that we all fall into. But sometimes these measurements are real. So you talk about in growing slow. For you, for example, a book has to sell a certain number of copies if you want there to be a second book, which resonated with me as an author. I'm like, yes, I feel it. Like if this book doesn't do well enough, so there is pressure. I think of my kids and going back into sports for high school and college, like they have to pass certain fitness tests. They have to get a certain time in their races if they want to continue. Like there are worldly measurements that um prevent us from maybe doing more. And so we like ideally we could say yes, we just take breaks and we slow down and it doesn't matter how much we get done, but the world does measure us that way. And everyone has different ways that they're measured. So how do we root ourselves in the truth that Jesus loves us as we are and will provide for us at the right time and at the right pace? That he doesn't always give us what we want, but he always gives us what we need. The Lord is my shepherd. I have everything
Mm.
I need. How do we root ourselves in that when so many metrics in the world are shouting, you have to have A, B, or C if you want to advance, if you want to say succeed. You need this ACT score if you want to get into this college. Like you were saying at the beginning, like it was get the good grades to get into the school, to do well in college. Like when that is the world we live in, how do we root ourselves in truth?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, I want to just shout out to people that it's okay to have big goals and dreams. And the last thing I would ever want to do is take that away from somebody who picks up the growing slow way. What I want to remove is the idea that you have to hurry to get there. You
Mhm.
will actually be reaching those goals more effectively if you just take a little bit of time. I'll use publishing as an example, and then I'll get to your question about specifically the spirituality piece of this and Jesus. But in publishing as an example, I'm also an acquisitions editor. So I see book proposals all the time coming from literary agents who are pitching books from first-time authors. And a lot of times, they promise to grow their email list or they promise to grow 10,000 followers by the end of the year. And what I always say back to the agent and the author is do the work slowly first. Don't try to figure out how to get a viral number of followers, and try to pitch a book deal. Like, do the work first. Like, do the thing that you need to do. If you're in study, if you're a high school kid, just do the work and study. If you're a college kid, just do the work slowly. Like, to stop finding workarounds, to stop finding shortcuts. There is so much work sitting behind anybody's progress that you can't see, like American Idol. There's no such thing as an overnight sensation.
Right.
So you really do have to work hard, but you don't have to work fast. And this gets to your question of rootedness. I learned this by living on a farm. I watch how when Scott plants literally millions of seeds into these many acres of ground of corn and soybeans, for sometimes a couple weeks, you see no growth. But that's not true. There is growth. You just can't see it. The roots are going down, down, down before the growth goes up.
Yeah.
And then, the growth day over day is almost imperceptible. But one day you look out the window and the corn is tasseling. And a little bit later, there's an ear on the corn. But the very last thing on the corn is the ear. It has to have all of those stages of growth before you reach harvest. You cannot plant and harvest corn on the same day. It has to take time. And that's the same for us, Maybe it takes you 5 years to get through college. It did me. Just grow slow. Do what you need to do to get through it, but resist the urge of trying to get it done quickly. And I think that's what Jesus is telling us when he says, and come and take his yoke, or it's an easy yoke. The world is constantly telling us to grow up, but, Jesus is really telling us to grow down,
Yeah.
down into the heart of things, and to be rooted in him, to be rooted in Christ and the things that he cares about most. And when you do that, that's when real fruit does grow, because you are rooted in him. You can't keep the whole thing going if you don't have deep roots. A storm
Right.
comes and your crops are going to fall over.
Right.
And the same is true for us. We can have a great resume and a lot of success and things look good on the outside, but if we're not rooted in Christ, when the storms of life come, we are going to fall.
Right. No, for sure. It's the verse in Matthew about building our lives on Jesus, who is our rock for when the storms come. But that, I always think of the three little pigs when I hear that. But like building the house with straw, which is the quick build a house in one day,
So true.
that doesn't last. Or even what was it next? Like just like planks of wood or something, like build it in 1 week. Build your following, build your dream, build it in 1 week. Well, the big bad wolf's going to blow it down, right? But it was the little pig who built it brick by brick. If we build our lives on Christ, that's really what's going to hold us in the hard times, because there are going to be challenges. I mean, listen, we live in the world and life is hard, no matter what dream we're chasing, no matter what goals we have, no matter what God has put in our heart as our passion, as our vocation, as our purpose. There will be roadblocks along the way, but it's those deep roots that'll hold us strong. And also, if we think about it in the plants way, and I'm not a gardener or a farmer, so excuse me if I get this wrong, but some plants come back every year, and those are the ones that have really great roots, right? So if that's how we sustain ourselves season after season in life, is from the roots. Like my daffodils, I can't even see them right now, but I know their roots are down there in the ground, and come March, they'll show up again because they have great roots. And nobody sees the daffodils right now. But I think that's true in our life too. We have these seasons of blooming, and then where we root down and maybe do some more studying, do some more work, do some more training, and then we get our seasons for blooming. But it's again the unforced rhythms of grace, and that it's these rhythms of going and slowing and working all day and then saying goodnight to our office at night, and working and then going for a walk in the middle of the day to take a rest. And I think it's those rhythms that keep our roots growing, keep us going, keep us healthy for the long term, which is really should be our goal. It shouldn't be what happens next week. It
That's
should
right.
be the long haul. The long haul. So you also have something that you say in Growing Slow that I love so much, which I think goes with this. You talk about never saying I'm just a stay-at-home mom. I'm just an entry-level position. I'm just a intern, whatever. I think this ties in so much with this because I believe as people are headed towards their goals, their dreams, their passions, when we are growing those roots, when we are doing the work and nobody sees the fruit, not even us, it's hard to acknowledge that something good is happening or that God is doing something. And so I think we're often like, yeah, but I'm just a. And I was wondering if you could speak into that some about how we can reframe that statement. Because every time we say, I'm just a, we're literally taking away from who Christ created us to be. Like he says, we are his masterpieces and that we are wonderful and that we are his prized possessions and we are royal and holy and chosen. We're like, I'm just a, like, we're literally denying what he has said. Um,
Yeah.
so, how do we reframe this? Like, in the publishing world, I want to be an author, I want to get a book published, but I'm just a blogger. Or, you want to be a parent one day and you're like, I'm just trying to get pregnant. Or I have a daughter who runs marathons. Like, I'm just training for a marathon versus like being a marathon runner. Like, how do you get out of this I'm just a mindset and instead owning who you are in Christ?
Yeah, it's so common. I remember when I was a young mom and I was no longer a newspaper reporter, which was my big, fancy, important career before I quit and we moved to the farm. And I remember the first time I said in a room where we were introducing ourselves by, our vocations.
Yeah.
I remember saying, I'm just a mom. And I'm like, what? Like, that's, I caught myself saying that. And it was, there was a couple other women in the room that really called me out on it too. And I'm like, I know that's terrible. Like, that is such a high calling. It is such important work. But I think that when you are in the midst of some of those justas, I'm just a student, I'm just a mom, I'm whatever, it's hard to see because the growth out of that land is slow. So, when you're exhausted and you've got a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old and you're wiping little hands and, putting away toys and tripping over Legos and just, have a kind of tired that coffee can't cure, you do kind of fall
For
into
years on end.
yeah, you do fall into a justa. But when you let the growth go in the land that is your life, um, it's not, sometimes it takes years where you really see the growth and how all of those little things mattered. I see it now with my girls. Um, they're both out of the home. We have an empty nest. Our older daughter is going to Cambridge to get her master's in theology and faith starting in October. And then our younger daughter is finishing her senior year at Iowa State and is going, God willing, back to Southeast Asia for full-time ministry and mission
Wow.
work, the other side of the world.
Yeah.
So I think about all those justas when the girls were little. Like we'd have prayer time, and they had little notebooks where they would draw their prayers, or when they learned how to write, they would write them. And I'd think, oh, this is just my little efforts to try to create rhythms for our daughters to know the Lord. And, harmonizing sessions around the piano, they were just JUST harmonizing sessions. But now our older daughter she's an accomplished musician and is really interested in the intersection of theology and art. I think I said theology and faith before. I apologize. It's theology and art,
Yeah.
and
Beautiful.
music in particular. And those times when we would go serve at food banks, they just seemed like, not that big of a deal, but it created in our daughter a heart for other people to where she wants to devote her life to full-time mission. So when you're doing the little things that seem like nobody notices, that seem underappreciated, that seem like they fall into the box of just, they're a lot bigger than you can ever imagine. And you have to count on the fact that God is like a divine farmer and he's growing those things that look like just seeds
Yeah.
into something really, really beautiful. Just be patient to see the good things that grow out of that field of just.
That is so beautiful and such an encouragement to all the young mamas out there. Thank you for sharing, and also well done, good and faithful servant. What a great job you did with your girls. It's super sweet to see and hear how you nurtured them and where God has taken them. That's super sweet. Um, yeah, all the little things count. So, how do we savor the small things? How do we, like, you can look back and say, all those harmonizing times, all those prayer journals, they actually added up to something. But when you have littles running around, or when you're doing the grunt work, or you're in law school, reading those thick tort books, or like
Mm-hmm.
when you're doing the work, when you're in the weeds, like, how do you savor and say, hey, there's actually something good going on here? Like, do you have some tips and tricks on how to just savor the small things in the everyday?
Mm-hmm. One easy thing, and it's very popular, I'm sure many people already do this, but is to keep a gratitude list
Yes.
at the end of every day, even if it's just 3 things. Mine are
Uh-huh.
filled with things like puffy clouds and the way the leaves change, or some song I heard, or a text that I got from a friend. Those are all ways of savoring it's something that just takes like 3 or 4 minutes, but it's a way of kind of living your life twice. You've lived it once, but when you take time to write it down, you get an opportunity to remember, and it creates some neural pathways. So
Yes.
then, if you're keeping a gratitude list, your eyes the next day begin to scan the environment for more positive things that
Yes.
you want to give God praise for.
Yes.
You're creating a habit, even if you end up like not necessarily writing all of those things down. You're creating a way of savoring and seeing the world through the gifts of God, as simple as they may be, because most things that we can be grateful to God for aren't necessarily like these big, huge things, or somebody was cured of cancer, and those things happen. But there's so many of these other things. And if we wait for just the huge, big things to savor, then we're missing out on all of these other little micro miracles that are so important to building a life of faith and to savoring God's goodness in your own life. So that would certainly be one thing. Another way is, I mean, I am the queen of over documentation. Here's where the phone comes in handy. I love taking pictures of at least some bit of whatever moment we're having. I mean, not always taking pictures, but I love to be able to look back on those and
Yeah, me too.
relive times. I mean, today I went to work out at 5:35 in the morning. It's not a most pleasant time of day for me, but I saw the most beautiful moon
Mm.
sliding down the western sky, and I stopped and I got out of the car and I had to take a picture of it. I have it on my Instagram today. It's not even that pretty. I mean, in the picture, but it made me stop and pause enough
Yeah.
to that I wanted to take a picture of it. So just that's it's almost like a digital gratitude list. You're
Yeah.
taking pictures of things.
No, I
I love
totally do
posting
that
happy
too.
things on Facebook and Instagram. And it's not because I'm thinking, oh, my life is perfect and I'm on vacation, or I'm getting to do this fun thing with my family. Look at me. But it's a way of just calling out God's goodness. And I also like to savor other people's savoring instead of being jealous of their stuff. Like, I'm going to comment and I'm going to cheer you on and I'm going to be happy for the things that you're savoring in your life. So it's a great big savoring party, is basically what I'm talking about.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it does. If you post the moon and someone's like, "Oh yeah, maybe tonight I'll look for the moon, or tomorrow morning," and it just helps us remember. It helps us stir one another on to love and good works, right? If we are just like seeing what other people are doing and seeing beauty. I do the same thing. I'll be out on a run and I'm like, I'm running and I'm trying to get done with my run and my legs are tired and I'm breathing. I'm like, if I stop running, I'm not going to get, but there's a baby deer. I've got to take a picture of him right
Yep.
now. His spots are so cute. And I'll stop and get real quiet and take the picture. Or, there's some beautiful wildflowers growing and I'm like, okay, I got to stop and take a picture of them. And it's just there's so much beauty all around us, and we have to stop and notice it because I think we're so busy like speeding and scrolling by that we're missing so much of the beauty that God has for us. So, yeah, I love a little digital gratitude list. Also, then when you go back to your pictures, you're like,
Yep.
oh, dang, the moon was so pretty the other morning. And that might even motivate you to get up and work out again another morning because you might see the moon.
So good. So true.
So good. Um, yeah. Okay. So, what's something you've already savored today? What's something you're already grateful for today?
Well, the moon,
Besides the moon, which I'm going to
oh,
have to go on
besides the
Instagram and check
moon.
out your picture
Okay.
for sure.
I had, I am telling you, I look forward to my first morning cup of coffee, like before I go to bed the night before.
Oh, me too.
And so after workout, I was like, yes. And mine says, be careful or you'll end up in my book. That's what my mug
Oh,
today
well, that's
says.
fair too. Right?
Yeah,
Totally
yours is a lot
fair.
nicer. But I savored my coffee. I love my workout mornings because I get up earlier on workout mornings than I do on regular mornings. So then I'm able to, I had a nice, like, big chunk of Bible study time today, and I had that cup of coffee, and I'm getting to savor this time with you. This counts as savoring. I get to meet you.
Thank
We're
you.
two like-minded, like-hearted women who really are just encouraging anybody who's listening now to slow down and savor. And
Yeah.
man, I'm savoring this. This is awesome.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you. Me too. I am totally savoring this. Okay, since the name of this podcast is The Urgency of Slowing Down, you've told us how you're savoring some things today, but how this week, what is something that you will do to intentionally slow down? To say, I know that God has goodness for me. I know He doesn't want me to hustle. Culture's going to tell me it is, but I'm going to.
Yeah. So here's an example of where I have to hustle a little bit harder at the beginning of the week because I am going to go see my mom
Oh,
Thursday through Monday. And she's in an independent living facility now. And we have all kinds of fun activities planned.
I love that.
And I really don't want to have to take my computer.
Yeah.
I want to be able to just be fully present and savor time with mom. She's 85 years old and,
Sweet.
she's getting up there. And these moments are really important. We have a great relationship. I love spending time with her. So in this case, this would be an example of where I might have to push a little harder Monday
Sure.
and Tuesday and Wednesday in order to completely say goodbye to the office for several days
Yeah.
and savor time with mom.
Oh, that's so sweet. I love that so much. Time with mama is priceless. Time with family is priceless. Yeah, that's beautiful. That's awesome. Okay, Jennifer, I will put it in the show notes where everyone can find you. But if you could remind listeners where they can find you and where they can find your book, Growing Slow.
If you go to growingslowbook.com, there is everything, all the retailers that you would be interested in knowing about, including the Growing Slow Bible Study. And I have videos, free videos, when you buy the Growing Slow Bible Study. They're also on Right Now Media.
Awesome.
And I am Jennifer Dukesley everywhere on social media.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being on here today. Thank you for reminding everyone that in slowing down, we can actually savor the goodness that God has for us, that we can fight hustle culture and put awesome rhythms into our lives, boundaries, especially about putting our phones down, to experience the people and the goodness God has around us. I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today for that awesome conversation with Jennifer Dukesley. Praying you find ways to slow down from the hustle this week, like putting down your phone and maybe saying goodnight to your work to find more time for the unforced rhythms of grace Jesus offers you. Links to Jennifer and her book, Growing Slow, are all in the show notes. Make sure you're subscribing to the Urgency of Slowing Down podcast so you won't miss the next awesome episode. And for more ways to tap into the abundant life Jesus has for us, grab your copy of my latest book, The Urgency of Slowing Down, available at booksellers everywhere.